Rain still clung to the old rescue station when Wyatt Sloane walked into the auction. 14 retired K9 dogs waited behind metal gates, no longer called heroes, only assets. The former Navy SEAL had not come looking for another burden, but when he saw their tired eyes, he said the words no one expected. "I'll take them all." Then one German shepherd named Scout froze in the shadows. Around his old collar was a tag bearing the name of Wyatt's lost brother-in-arms. Subscribe to the channel, because some stories of loyalty are too powerful to miss. The rain had stopped before dawn, but Beaufort County still seemed to be holding its breath. Water clung to the grass in silver beads. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like old gray shawls, dripping slowly onto the muddy shoulders of the road. Beyond the pines, the empty disaster response station sat with its chain-link fence half swallowed by weeds, its sign faded by salt air and storm seasons until the words looked less written than remembered. Wyatt Sloane lived less than 2 miles from that station, in a small wooden house set back from the road, where the trees grew thick enough to hide a man who did not wish to be found. At 43, Wyatt still had the body of a man built for carrying weight through impossible places. He was 6'1", broad through the shoulders and chest, with the kind of hard, practical strength that did not come from mirrors. His face was square and sun-browned, his jaw usually held tight. His dark hair cut short at the sides with a few silver threads at the temples. A thin scar marked the tail of his right eyebrow, small enough that strangers missed it, sharp enough that children noticed. He wore a dark navy polo with the sleeves pushed up, charcoal work pants, and old brown waterproof boots. On his wrist was a scratched black tactical watch that had survived more bad nights than most men. He had survived them too. That was the trouble. Some parts of a man kept breathing long after they were done living in the present. That morning, Wyatt stood in his kitchen with one hand around a chipped mug of coffee and the other clenched around a bent metal whistle keychain. He did not remember picking it up. He only noticed it when the local emergency siren gave a short test wail somewhere down the county road. The sound was brief, a thin, harmless cry, but it went through him like cold wire. For half a second, the kitchen disappeared. The old pine floor became wet concrete. The window glass became a black square full of rain. Somewhere inside his skull, a radio crackled through static. "Wyatt, you copy?" He shut his eyes. The mug trembled once against the counter. Then the house returned. Coffee, wood smoke, damp air, a refrigerator humming badly in the corner. Wyatt opened his eyes and forced his fingers loose from the whistle. He was not in a collapsed building. He was not knee-deep in floodwater. Cole Bennett was not calling over a broken radio. Not today. The phone rang. Wyatt let it ring twice before answering. "Wyatt?" The voice belonged to Earl Pritchard, an old volunteer mechanic who still did odd work for the county. Earl had the gentle panic of a man who knew bad news was heavier when spoken aloud. "You hear what they're doing at the station?" Wyatt looked out the window toward the road. "What station?" "The old disaster K9 unit. They're clearing it out this morning." Wyatt said nothing. Earl breathed into the phone. 14 dogs, search and rescue, retired most of them. County says the funding's gone. New contractors taking over. Drones, sensors, imported dogs, all that shiny nonsense. They're holding an adoption auction at the warehouse. "Adoption auction," Wyatt repeated. "Yeah, that's what they're calling it." Earl's voice hardened. "Looks more like a yard sale with leashes." Wyatt turned his eyes toward the tree line. Beyond it, the old station waited in the damp morning, quiet as a church after the funeral. "I thought those dogs had handlers," Wyatt said. "Some did. Some handlers retired. Some moved. Some passed. Records are a mess." Earl paused. "A company man's already there. Palmetto Response Systems. Fellow named Preston Vale. Rumor is he wants the whole lot." "For what?" "That's the part nobody wants to say." Wyatt did not ask more. He already knew how institutions spoke when they were about to do something ugly. They used clean words: transition, modernization, efficiency, retirement, never abandonment. He hung up, stood still for a moment, then took his truck keys from the hook. Outside, the air smelled of mud and river weeds. His old pickup coughed twice before starting. As Wyatt drove toward the station, the tires hissed through shallow puddles, and the landscape opened in brief, melancholy flashes. Low fields still shining with rain, mailbox flags rusted upright, a white egret standing motionless in a ditch like a saint who had lost faith in people. By the time he reached the county disaster response warehouse, several vehicles had already gathered outside: pickup trucks, a county van, 2 polished SUVs that looked offended by the mud. A banner had been zip-tied to the fence. "Retired Disaster K9 Adoption Event." Someone had added a paper sign beneath it. "Fees due at time of award." Wyatt sat in the truck for a moment, reading that last word. Award. As if a dog that had crawled through flood debris and hurricane wreckage could be awarded like a used generator. He got out. The warehouse doors were rolled open. Inside, the smell hit him first. Wet fur, old metal, disinfectant, damp concrete, and the faint, dusty odor of paperwork stored too long in boxes. 14 wire kennels had been arranged in 2 rows beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. The dogs inside were not puppies, not sleek showroom animals, not fresh recruits with bright vests and new commands. They were older, not broken, older. A yellow Labrador with a graying muzzle rested her chin against the bars, watching every person with tired gentleness. A large German shepherd stood near the front of his kennel as if guarding the others, one hip held slightly stiff. A smaller black and white dog had managed to drag a towel halfway through the bars and was lying on it like a queen who had conquered a kingdom of laundry. A few people chuckled at that. Wyatt did not. He saw the posture, the ears, the waiting. These were workers who did not understand why the job had ended. Near the kennels stood a young woman in a faded rescue unit jacket. She was not much more than 30, with brown hair tied low and a waterproof notebook tucked under one arm. Her face had the tired alertness of someone who had been trying all morning not to cry in front of officials. She knelt by the Labrador's cage, slipped 2 fingers through the bars, and whispered, "It's okay, Mabel, I know. The dog licked her fingers once. Then a man in a gray field jacket stepped into the center of the warehouse and clapped his hands lightly, not loudly. That was the first thing Wyatt disliked about him. The man did not need to be loud. He expected the room to organize itself around him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling with polished restraint, "thank you for participating in this transition process." Wyatt looked at him. Preston Vale was about 48, trim, clean-shaven, and too dry for a room full of wet dogs. His steel gray jacket had the Palmetto Response Systems logo stitched over the heart. His shoes were spotless, despite the mud outside. In one hand, he held a black tablet. In the other, a paper cup of coffee he had not drunk. "These animals have served with distinction," Preston continued. "But disaster response is changing. We now have better tools, more efficient mapping platforms, drone grids, thermal scanning, and younger specialized canine assets that can operate within modern deployment standards. A low whine came from one of the kennels. Preston did not look toward it. Wyatt's hand closed around the bent whistle in his pocket. Modern deployment standards. He had heard men dress cowardice in better uniforms. A county clerk sat at a folding table with a stack of forms. Beside her, two men in windbreakers whispered over a clipboard. A few locals stood in the back, uncertain whether they had come to adopt a dog or witness something that should not have been allowed indoors. The young woman in the rescue jacket rose from Mabel's kennel. She glanced at Wyatt, noticing his size first, then his eyes, then the way he stood at the edge of the room, as if measuring exits. "You here to bid?" she asked quietly. Wyatt looked at the dogs. "I'm here to listen." Her mouth tightened, then listened fast. "What's your name?" "Maya Ellison." She shifted the notebook under her arm. "I handled records and medical checks here. Not that anybody is reading them today." "Wyatt Sloane." "I know." She said it without surprise, but not unkindly. "Earl said you might come." One of the dogs barked once, sharp and offended, as if the whole room had failed basic decency. Maya looked back at the kennels. "They're not equipment," she said. "No," Wyatt answered. "They're not." The auction began with a speech from a county administrator who kept clearing his throat. He explained that due to budget restructuring and contracted modernization, the retired K-9 assets, he actually said assets, would be placed through a fee-based adoption process. Each adopter would need to sign liability papers. Long-term care would be the adopter's responsibility. The county would provide no continuing support. Wyatt watched the dogs as each number was called. Lot 1, Mabel, female Labrador, age 9. The old lab blinked sleepily as though she had heard more dignified names in her life and was waiting for them to remember. Lot 2, Tank, male German Shepherd, age 10. The big shepherd did not move, except to turn his head toward Mabel, like an old sergeant making sure no one bothered his people. Lot 3, June, mixed working breed, age 7. The black and white dog had now stolen the towel entirely into her kennel and looked very proud of the crime. A few bids came in, low ones, hesitant ones. People whispered about food costs, vet bills, age, liability. Then Preston raised his hand. "For Palmetto Response Systems," he said, "we are prepared to take custody of the full group, pending transfer of records." Maya went very still. The county administrator looked relieved. The clerk looked down. The locals looked at one another with the embarrassed gratitude of people who had been spared responsibility by someone they did not trust. Wyatt felt something inside him begin to move. It was not anger, not exactly. Anger was hot. This was colder. This was the feeling that came when someone tried to bury the living before they had stopped breathing. Preston smiled lightly. "This may be the cleanest solution for all parties. Our company has appropriate facilities, and we can determine which animals may still provide limited training value." Limited training value. The words crossed the room and landed among the kennels like a door being shut. Mabel lowered her head. Tank pressed his nose to the bars. June stopped chewing the towel, and in the farthest kennel, partly hidden where the fluorescent light failed, a dark German shepherd lifted his head. Wyatt had not noticed him before. The dog stood slowly. Sable coat, black along the back, gray around the muzzle, amber-brown eyes fixed not on Preston, not on the clerk, not on the crowd, on Wyatt. For a moment the warehouse seemed to narrow to that stare, The dog did not wag, did not bark, did not plead. He watched Wyatt like a witness waiting to see whether a man would lie under oath. Wyatt looked away first. That shamed him more than he expected. The administrator lifted the gavel. "Unless there are competing bids for the full group, I'll take them." The words left Wyatt before he had prepared them. Silence fell so suddenly that the buzzing lights seemed louder. The administrator blinked. "Excuse me?" Wyatt stepped forward. "I said I'll take them. Every last rescue dog." Someone in the back laughed once, thinking it was a joke. Another person joined, then stopped when Wyatt did not smile. Preston turned slowly. His eyes measured Wyatt from boots to scar. "Mr. Sloane, is it?" he said. "This is a significant commitment." "I know what commitment means." A small rustle moved through the room. Maya stared at Wyatt as if he had just opened a door in a burning house. The administrator shuffled papers. "There are requirements, housing, enclosure, proof of food supply, veterinary intake within 10 days, county follow-up inspection. Given the number of animals, this would likely be temporary custody pending review." "Write it that way," Wyatt said. "Do you understand the cost?" "No." That drew another nervous laugh. Wyatt looked at the kennels. "But I understand the cost of letting someone else decide they're done." Preston's smile did not vanish. It hardened. "With respect," Preston said, "these dogs require professional evaluation." "They had professional lives," Wyatt replied. "Maybe what they require now is not being treated like expired batteries." The county administrator looked as if he wished the roof would collapse politely and end the meeting. Maya moved quickly to the table before he could reconsider. "I can prepare the temporary adoption packet," she said. Her voice was too firm, daring someone to challenge it. 30-day conditional care agreement, emergency placement clause, follow-up inspection. The administrator hesitated. Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Wyatt saw it, so did Maya. And perhaps the dark shepherd in the last kennel saw it too, because his ears shifted forward. Paperwork took nearly an hour. Wyatt signed his name again and again until the pen left a dent in his fingers. He listed his property, his barn, his fenced-back acre, the well pump, the storage shed he could convert, the old storm shelter that stayed dry in floods. Maya added notes from memory, speaking quickly, protecting the dogs with facts. "This one needs soft bedding for her hips." "Mabel?" Wyatt asked. Maya nodded, surprised he remembered. "That one, Tank, doesn't like slick floors. June will open simple latches if bored. Don't ask me how. She has the morals of a raccoon." Despite himself, Wyatt looked toward June. June was staring at the latch of her kennel with scholarly interest. Wyatt almost smiled. Almost. One by one, the kennels were marked for temporary transfer. Some dogs watched him, some ignored him. Some seemed too tired to hope. Wyatt did not promise them anything aloud. He had never trusted promises made in rooms full of witnesses. Promises meant more when spoken in the dark, while carrying the weight. At last Maya led him toward the farthest kennel. The dark shepherd remained standing. "Scout," Maya said softly. "Male German shepherd, 8 years old. Former disaster search dog. He's difficult." Scout's amber eyes remained on Wyatt. "Difficult how?" "He doesn't trust fast, doesn't like men leaning over him, eats last, sleeps near doors, reacts to storm sirens." Maya swallowed. "He was transferred between units after the Combahee flood. Records are messy." Wyatt felt the old cold move under his ribs. "The flood 5 years ago?" Maya looked at him. Yes. Scout gave a low growl. Not loud, not wild. A warning made of grief. Wyatt stopped 3 feet from the kennel and lowered his gaze, not in submission, but respect. He knew better than to reach for a creature guarding a wound. "All right," he said quietly. "I won't crowd you." Scout's lips settled, though his body stayed rigid. Maya crouched near the kennel door. He wasn't supposed to be in today's batch at first. His file got added late. By who? I don't know. Wyatt studied the dog. Scout's collar was old, dark brown leather, cracked near the buckle. Beneath the main strap, something metallic caught the weak light and vanished again under a fold of worn material. "What's that?" Maya followed his gaze. "What?" "The tag under the collar." She frowned. "He has a county ID tag." "Not that one." Wyatt crouched slowly, knees popping once. Scout growled again, but he did not retreat. Wyatt did not put his hand through the bars. He only waited. The warehouse had grown quieter around them. Even Preston across the room seemed to be watching. Maya reached carefully through the side of the kennel, fingers practiced, gentle. "Easy, Scout! Easy, old man!" Scout trembled, not from fear, Wyatt thought, but restraint. Maya lifted the hidden strip of leather. A small metal tag slid into view. It was scratched nearly smooth, stained with old mud packed into the grooves. Wyatt could not read it at first. Then Maya rubbed it with her thumb. The letters appeared one by one. Cole Bennett. For a moment, Wyatt did not understand what he was seeing. The name sat there in the fluorescent light, small and impossible, as if the dead had learned to write themselves back into the world. Cole Bennett. Cole, who used to laugh too loudly before missions, because silence made men think too much. Cole, who had once dragged Wyatt out of a bad night by sitting beside him on a barracks floor and talking about barbecue, baseball, and a dog he swore was smarter than half the command staff. Cole, who had vanished in floodwater 5 years ago while a radio screamed static and Wyatt stood somewhere too far away to matter. Wyatt reached for the bars, then stopped himself. His hand shook. Scout watched him with those old amber eyes, and now Wyatt understood the stare. Not accusation, recognition, or something close enough to cut. Maya whispered, "Wyatt?" He could not answer. Across the warehouse, Preston Vale's tablet lowered a fraction. Wyatt saw it only at the edge of his vision, but he saw enough. The room smelled of wet fur and metal and rain-soaked concrete. Outside, water dripped from the warehouse roof in slow, patient beats. 14 forgotten dogs waited in their cages, and one of them wore the name of Wyatt Sloane's dead friend against his throat. Wyatt finally breathed in. Then he looked at Scout and said so quietly only Maya could hear, "Where have you been, boy?" Scout did not move closer. He did not soften. He only stood in the dim corner of the kennel, guarding the tag like it was the last warm coal from a fire everyone else had abandoned. And Wyatt knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones, that he had not come to this warehouse to adopt 14 dogs. He had been summoned by one. By noon, Wyatt Sloane's quiet property had surrendered. The yard that had once held only a rusted water trough, a leaning woodpile, and the stubborn silence of a man living alone, now shook with the sound of 14 retired disaster dogs discovering a new country. Mabel, the old yellow Labrador, stepped down from the trailer first, with the caution of a church lady entering a dance hall. She sniffed the wet grass, looked at Wyatt as if judging the moral condition of the place, and then walked straight to the patch of sunlight beside the porch. Tank came next. heavy-shouldered and grave, his dark muzzle flecked with gray. He inspected the fence line before he inspected his water bowl. Wyatt watched him make one slow circle around the yard and thought, without meaning to, "There's the security chief." June, the small black and white working mix, needed no tour. She darted out, stole one of Wyatt's gloves from the tailgate, and vanished behind a stack of storm boards with the speed and confidence of an outlaw already familiar with the local terrain. "June," Maya Ellison said, not even looking up from the clipboard in her hand, "has no respect for private property." Wyatt stood beside the trailer, one hand on the open gate, and watched the little dog's tail disappear. "Does she bite?" "No," Maya said. "She reorganizes." That almost pulled a smile from him. Almost. Maya had followed him from the warehouse in her old county pickup, which carried bags of food, medical files, worn leashes, stainless bowls, and an emergency supply list written in her neat block letters. The young woman moved through the yard with purpose, her faded rescue jacket damp at the shoulders, her hair tied low at her neck. She looked too young to carry so much grief over dogs, but old enough in the eyes to know grief had many species. Wyatt's place sat beneath live oaks and loblolly pines, a wooden house with a tin roof and a long barn that had once sheltered boats before the last owner gave up on repairing anything. There was a fenced back acre, a dry shed, a well pump that groaned like a tired mule, and a storm cellar built by someone who had trusted concrete more than prayer. It was not perfect, but it was not a cage. Wyatt worked without talking much. He hauled bedding from the barn, opened feed bags, patched 2 weak places in the fence, and dragged old pallets into the shed to raise sleeping mats off the damp floor. His navy polo darkened with sweat. Mud climbed his boots. Twice the dogs knocked over a water bowl. Once, June returned the stolen glove only to take the other one as payment for her honesty. Maya wrote each incident down. "You really put that in the file?" Wyatt asked. "Behavioral notes matter?" "She stole my glove. She demonstrated problem-solving under changing conditions." Wyatt looked at her. Maya did not blink. Then, from the porch, Mabel gave a soft sigh and laid her chin on Wyatt's boot. He looked down. The old Labrador did not ask permission. She had simply decided his foot was now part of her retirement plan. Something inside Wyatt shifted, small as a match flame cupped against wind. He crouched and scratched gently behind her ear. Mabel closed her eyes with the solemn gratitude of a queen receiving tribute. Her fur smelled like rain, disinfectant, and the faint dust of the old warehouse. "They all have names," Maya said quietly. Wyatt kept his hand on Mabel's head. "I know." "No," she said. "I mean real names, not numbers, not asset codes. Names they answered to in wreckage, in floodwater, in the dark." Wyatt looked toward the yard. Tank stood by the gate, watching the road. June had begun digging under a tarp, apparently investigating whether crime could be stored there. 3 other dogs slept in a loose cluster near the barn door. A hound mix with white around the eyes leaned against a bucket, as if the day had personally exhausted him. At the far edge of the yard, Scout stood alone. The sable German shepherd had left the trailer last, not with fear, not with excitement, with calculation. His amber eyes had moved across the house, fence, trees, trailer, Wyatt, Maya, then back to the road. He had accepted water only after every other dog drank. When food was poured, he waited until the bowls were abandoned before approaching one. Now he stood near the shaded side of the barn, his old brown collar dark against the fur of his neck. The hidden tag beneath it caught no light from this distance. but Wyatt knew it was there. Cole Bennett. 2 words no longer safely buried in memory. Maya followed his gaze. He may take time. How much? With Scout? She tucked the clipboard under one arm. That depends on what he thinks you are. Wyatt watched the dog. What do you think he thinks I am? Maya hesitated. A question. That answer stayed with him longer than he liked. By late afternoon, the yard had become a map of small negotiations. Wyatt learned not to step too quickly near the shepherd with the stiff hip. He learned Mabel preferred soft words but did not require them. He learned June could open a feed bin latch if the latch had too much faith in itself. He learned 2 of the dogs hated thunder. One adored the sound of the hose, and one ancient spaniel mix would howl mournfully whenever Wyatt bent over, as though offended by the human spine. Scout taught him nothing. Scout kept his distance, not hostile, worse than hostile, deliberate. He lay near the barn door, never fully resting. His ears moved at every truck on the road. When Wyatt carried bowls past him, Scout's eyes followed the hands, not the food. When Maya approached, he allowed her closer, but even then his body stayed angled toward an exit. He sleeps near doors, Wyatt asked. Maya glanced up. Always. Eats last. Always. Doesn't turn his back to running water. Maya's face changed. You noticed. I noticed things that don't sleep either. The words came out rougher than he intended. Maya gave him a look that was not pity. He appreciated that. Pity sat on a man's shoulders like wet wool. She opened one of the file boxes on the tailgate and pulled out a plastic folder. I brought what I could find on Scout. It isn't much. His file has gaps. Gaps happen. These don't feel like gaps. She handed him the folder. They feel like someone erased around him. Wyatt did not open it right away. The sun had lowered behind the pines, turning the wet grass copper. The dogs had begun settling. Some sprawled in the shed. Tank still guarded the gate with unpaid dedication. Mabel snored faintly near the porch. June had fallen asleep on Wyatt's missing glove, which she had apparently adopted out of mercy. Scout remained awake. Wyatt opened the folder. There were medical notes, vaccination records, deployment codes, handler assignments with names missing in places they should not have been missing. Some pages were copies of copies, gray and blurred. One line stopped Wyatt cold. Transferred after Combahee flood response. No handler listed. No final field report attached. Wyatt stared at the words until the page seemed to ripple. Combahee. The river had many moods. He remembered one of them too well. Brown water rising with the speed of a living thing. Rain hammering so hard the world lost its edges. The radio full of voices trying to sound calm while fear climbed through the static. Cole had been one of those voices. Wyatt closed the folder. Maya noticed. You knew Cole Bennett, she said. It was not a question. Wyatt kept his eyes on Scout. Yes. Were you with him in the service? Before, during, after. Wyatt swallowed once. Some men you meet and keep meeting, even when they're not in the room anymore. Maya looked down at her notebook. He was Scout's handler. At least, that's what the old training logs suggest. But in the official transfer record, Cole's name disappears. Wyatt felt the evening cool against the sweat on his neck. He had a mother, he said. Ruth. I found an address. Of course she had. Maya seemed like the kind of person who collected loose threads because she could not bear to leave anything unraveling. Wyatt looked again at the old tag beneath Scout's collar. Does she know about the dog? I don't think anyone told her. The yard seemed to grow quiet around that. Even June, traitor queen of stolen gloves, slept without twitching. Wyatt had faced rooms full of armed men, blackout skies, doors that might hide ruin behind them. Yet the thought of walking into Ruth Bennett's house with a photograph of that tag made his chest tighten in a different way. War taught men how to break down doors. It did not teach them how to knock on a mother's grief. Maya seemed to understand. You don't have to go tonight. Wyatt looked at the folder in his hand. 5 years. Ruth Bennett had waited 5 years inside a sentence no one had finished. I do, he said. He took a photo of the tag from a careful distance, not forcing Scout closer. Scout watched him the whole time, amber eyes unreadable. When Wyatt stood, the dog rose too, not following, not stopping him, just witnessing. The drive to Ruth Bennett's house took 20 minutes and 5 years. Her home sat on a narrow road lined with pecan trees. A small white house with blue shutters and a porch swept so clean it looked like a form of resistance. A clay pot of basil sat by the steps. Wind chimes turned in the damp air, making a sound too delicate for what Wyatt carried in his pocket. Ruth Bennett opened the door before he knocked a second time. She was smaller than he remembered, though perhaps memory had made her larger to hold all that sorrow. Her hair, once pale blonde, had gone white and was clipped back loosely. She wore a cream cardigan over a blue blouse, and her eyes, Cole's eyes, if grief had washed the laughter out of them, held on to Wyatt's face. Wyatt Sloane, she said. Yes, ma'am. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ruth stepped aside. Come in before the mosquitoes elect you mayor. The old humor hit him harder than tears might have. Her house smelled of cornbread, furniture polish, and lavender soap. Photographs lined the hallway. Cole at 12 with a fishing pole, Cole in uniform, Cole laughing beside a rescue truck, Cole kneeling next to a German shepherd with one hand on the dog's collar. Wyatt stopped. There, in the photograph, younger and darker muzzled, stood Scout. Ruth followed his gaze. That was the dog. Wyatt's mouth went dry. Cole called him Scout, she said. Said that dog could find a lost soul in a thunderstorm, then judge him for getting lost in the first place. Wyatt almost heard Cole saying it. He took out his phone, but for a moment his thumb would not move. Ruth watched him carefully. What is it, Wyatt? He showed her the photograph of the tag. The room changed. Nothing moved, yet everything shifted. The ticking clock became too loud. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the kitchen, something settled in the walls with a soft wooden creak. Ruth did not cry. At first, she did not even breathe. She touched the screen with one finger, not on the letters, but just below them, as if touching Cole's name directly would break some law of the universe. Where did you find this? On Scout. Her eyes lifted. He's alive? Yes, ma'am. Ruth sat down slowly in the nearest chair. Wyatt moved forward, then stopped, unsure whether help would insult her strength. Cole put that tag there, she whispered. He called me before the last deployment. Civilian work, he said. Flood response, he said. Nothing dramatic, Mama. Just rain and mud and stubborn people. Her mouth trembled once. He said Scout didn't like the new collar, so he gave him something familiar. Wyatt stood with the phone in his hand and felt the years gather in the corners of the room. They never told me, Ruth said. Not about the dog, not about the collar. I only found out today. She nodded, but her eyes had gone somewhere far away. They said no confirmation. They said conditions were too unstable. They said maybe someday there would be more information. A faint, tired smile crossed her face. Someday is a cruel word when people use it to avoid today. Wyatt lowered his head. I'm sorry. Ruth looked at him then. For what? He could not answer. For being alive. For not being there. For every night he had heard Cole over the radio and woken with his hands clenched around nothing. Ruth seemed to hear the unspoken confession anyway. Wyatt, she said, my son loved you like a brother. If there had been blame to leave behind, Cole would have left it with instructions, probably written badly and folded wrong. A laugh broke out of Wyatt before he could stop it. It was small and wounded, but real. Ruth smiled through eyes that had begun to shine. He once mailed me a grocery list instead of a birthday card. That sounds like Cole. He wrote "Love you" at the bottom, so I kept it. Silence settled again, but now it had warmth in it. Wyatt told her what he could. The auction, the dogs, Maya, Scout's file, the missing handler lines. He did not accuse anyone. Not yet. He did not promise answers. He had learned promises could become knives if they arrived empty. Ruth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she rose and walked to a hook beside the hallway. Hanging there was a faded yellow rescue jacket. Cole's jacket. The fabric had lost its brightness, but the name patch remained. Bennett Ruth touched the sleeve. Titanium. He said Scout was the most stubborn creature God ever built, she said. Said if the world ended, Scout would report for duty and complain about the paperwork. Wyatt looked toward the photograph again. He still eats last, he said. Ruth closed her eyes. A single tear slipped free then, quiet and dignified. She wiped it away as if it were a guest that had arrived too early. Can I see him? Yes. Not tonight. She looked toward the window, where evening had thickened into blue shadow. If I see him tonight, I may ask him a question only Cole can answer. That would not be fair to an old dog. Wyatt nodded. Ruth turned back to him. But you listened to that animal, Wyatt Sloane. Cole trusted him. If Scout carried that name for 5 years, he carried it for a reason. The words followed Wyatt all the way home. By the time he returned, the property was dark except for the porch light and the soft yellow glow spilling from the barn. Maya had stayed. She sat on an overturned bucket, writing in her waterproof notebook, while Mabel slept against her boot, and June gnawed on what looked suspiciously like Wyatt's second glove. Ruth? Maya asked. She knows. Maya's face tightened with sympathy. How did she take it? Like someone who's been holding a door open for 5 years and just heard footsteps. Maya closed the notebook. Across the yard, Scout stood beneath the porch eave, half in shadow. The old dog watched Wyatt step from the truck. Rainwater dripped from the roof in slow beats. Somewhere beyond the trees, frogs began their night chorus. Wyatt did not approach him. He sat on the porch step instead, elbows on his knees, hands open. The dog stayed where he was. Minutes passed. Maya gathered the files quietly and went to her truck, leaving without turning the moment into something fragile. Wyatt listened to her engine fade down the road. Then Scout moved, not quickly, not affectionately. He crossed the porch boards with the slow caution of a creature approaching a bridge that had once burned. He stopped in front of Wyatt and lowered his head toward the metal tags at Wyatt's chest. Wyatt held still. Scout sniffed the old military dog tags, then the bent whistle keychain resting in Wyatt's palm. His ears shifted, His breathing changed. For one small moment, the distance between man and dog narrowed, not into trust, not yet, but into recognition of the same weather. Then Scout pressed his muzzle lightly against Wyatt's knee. Wyatt's throat tightened. He did not reach for the dog. He did not ruin the gift by grabbing at it. He only whispered, "I knew him too." Scout remained there for 3 breaths. Then he stepped back, turned, and lay down beside the door with his body facing the yard. Guarding. Always guarding. Wyatt sat on the porch until the night deepened around them. Behind him, 14 old rescue dogs slept in a place that had been lonely that morning and was now inconveniently, gloriously alive. In the pocket of his shirt, Wyatt's phone held the photograph of Cole's name. At his feet, Scout kept watch. And for the first time, Wyatt understood that the old tag was not only proof of who Scout had belonged to. It was a question. What happened to the man who never came home? Paper had its own kind of smell when people wanted the truth to stay dead. Wyatt Sloane learned that before sunrise, sitting at the old workbench in his barn with Scout's file spread beneath a yellow shop light. The pages smelled of dust, mildew, copier toner, and something faintly sour from years of damp storage. Outside, the 14 retired rescue dogs slept in uneven peace across the property. Mabel snored near the porch. Tank kept his post by the gate. June had dragged one of Wyatt's gloves into her bed and was sleeping with her chin on it like a dragon guarding treasure. Scout did not sleep. The old German shepherd lay near the barn door, facing outward, his sable back catching the weak gold of the lamp. Every few minutes, his ears moved toward the road, then toward the house, then back to Wyatt. Not nervous, not calm either. Scout seemed to live in a country between duty and memory, and he had no intention of leaving his post. Maya Ellison sat across from Wyatt with 3 file boxes stacked at her feet and a waterproof notebook open in front of her. She had come before dawn with gas station coffee, 2 folders under one arm, and the expression of someone who had slept badly but chosen usefulness over complaint. "This is the original intake sheet," she said, sliding a form toward him. Scout was listed as SAR K911B after the Combahee flood response. Wyatt looked at the line she tapped. SAR K911B. No name, no handler, no final field report attached. Maya placed another document beside it. But 6 months earlier, in a training schedule, he's listed as Scout. Handler, Cole Bennett. Wyatt did not touch that page right away. The name had become heavier since Ruth's house. It was no longer only his grief. It belonged to a mother's quiet kitchen, to a faded yellow rescue jacket, to a pair of boots left by the door like an unanswered prayer. Maya continued, careful but relentless. Shaktita. 3 months after the flood, Scout's deployment code changes again. Same dog, different number, then the retirement date gets moved twice. Clerical error, Wyatt said, though his tone made it clear he did not believe it. That's what lazy people call sin when it fits in a spreadsheet. Wyatt looked at her. Maya kept reading. He almost smiled. Almost. She had a way of saying hard things softly, which somehow made them harder. For 2 hours, they built a timeline from fragments. Scout assigned to Cole. Cole assigned to the Combahee flood response. Scout transferred. Cole listed as missing. Status unresolved. Scout's handler field removed. Search zone records amended. Final K9 scent report marked incomplete. 3 pages copied so badly that the middle lines had gone gray, as if swallowed by fog. Wyatt wrote nothing. He remembered instead. Cole's laugh. Cole's bad handwriting. Cole calling every stubborn dog Sir because, as he once said, Respect is cheaper than stitches. Coal vanishing into rain and static while the world became water. Maya pulled out a folded map sealed in a plastic sleeve. "This was in the back of the box," she said. "Not in the official packet. It was tucked inside an old equipment checkout log." Wyatt unfolded it carefully. The map showed a stretch of the Combahee River and the surrounding lowlands, marked with search grids. Several areas had been highlighted in blue and red. A few coordinates were blacked out with heavy marker, but the ink had faded enough that faint impressions remained underneath. Wyatt leaned closer. Maya turned on the flashlight from her phone and angled it low. "Look there." Under one black slash, numbers ghosted through. Not readable, but not gone. Wyatt felt Scout rise behind him. The dog's nails clicked once on the barn floor. Maya noticed, too. "He knows that map. Or he knows what we feel when we look at it." Scout came closer, not to Wyatt, but to the workbench. He lowered his head and sniffed the edge of the map, then turned away abruptly, as if the paper itself had teeth. Wyatt took the plastic sleeve and moved it out of reach. Tucked into the folded crease was a loose half-page from a field notebook. The handwriting was rushed, slanted, unmistakably human in its impatience. Scout marked second scent point. "Need return before water shifts. New oak marker does not match prior grid." Below that, written harder, as if the pen had nearly torn the paper, "Do not trust updated map." Wyatt read it twice. Maya did not speak. The barn seemed to tighten around them. At last Wyatt said, "This is Cole's handwriting. You're sure? I'd know his chicken scratch in a hurricane." Scout made a low sound, not a growl this time. Something smaller. Something held in the chest. Wyatt turned the page over. Nothing on the back. No answer. Only a warning left behind like a match struck in a tunnel. By mid-morning, Maya insisted the next step had to be legal. Wyatt did not like the word. Legal meant waiting. Legal meant rooms where people used language to make the obvious feel uncertain. But he knew she was right. A map and a field note might matter, or they might be dismissed as damaged records found by a traumatized former SEAL on a property full of retired dogs. That was how men like Preston Vale survived. They did not need to destroy the truth. They only needed to make it look unstable. Sheriff Alma Greer worked out of a brick building near the courthouse, where the air smelled of raincoats, coffee, and old wood polish. Her office held no sentimental clutter. A framed county map, a shelf of case binders, a clean desk, and a small silver fountain pen placed exactly parallel to a legal pad. The woman behind the desk had a steady face and silver threaded through her short, dark hair. She looked up as Wyatt and Maya entered, and Wyatt felt immediately that she had measured both of them before they reached the chairs. "Mr. Sloane," she said. "Miss Ellison." Her voice was calm, neither warm nor cold. The voice of someone who did not open doors just because a story sounded sad. Wyatt respected that. Maya set the file on the desk. "Sheriff, we found inconsistencies in the Combahee flood records connected to Scout and Cole Bennett." Alma did not reach for the file yet. "I know who Cole Bennett was." Wyatt's jaw tightened. The sheriff saw it, but did not soften. "I also know what people say about you, Mr. Sloane." Maya shifted in her chair. Wyatt said, "People say a lot when they don't want to look too close." "That is true." Alma finally opened the folder. "It is also true that grief can make patterns out of stains." Wyatt leaned back. There it was. The clean wall every wounded man eventually hit. You may be right, but you may also be broken. Alma read in silence. Her eyes moved from the handler record to the transfer sheet, from the blacked-out map to Cole's note. When she reached the sentence about the oak marker, she stopped. "How did you get this?" Maya answered. "It was in archived rescue unit storage. I had access before the closure. These boxes were supposed to be transferred with the dog's medical records, but some were left behind. Convenient." "Yes," Maya said, "or careless." Alma looked at her for a long moment. Then the sheriff turned to Wyatt. "What are you asking me to do?" Wyatt had expected that question. He still hated it. "Look at the records before they disappear. That is not a warrant. No. It is not proof of a crime. No. It is enough to make certain people nervous." Wyatt nodded. "That's why we came now." Alma closed the folder but kept her hand on it. "Palmetto Response Systems has active contracts with the county. If I start pulling records because you found an old tag on a dog, I need more than feeling." Wyatt said nothing. Maya reached into her notebook and removed a printed still from a training video. Cole kneeling beside Scout, one hand on the collar, his face half turned toward the camera. Scout was not just any retired dog, Maya said. He was Cole's working partner. Someone removed that connection from the official file. Alma looked at the photograph. Something flickered in her expression then. Not sentiment. Recognition. The kind that came when a locked drawer made the same sound as one from an old case. "I have seen Palmetto's name too often after storms," she said at last. "Always with clean invoices and muddy edges." Wyatt met her eyes. Alma slid the folder back across the desk. "I am not opening an investigation today." Maya's shoulders fell. "But," the sheriff continued, "I am making a note that these records were brought to me. I am also advising both of you not to trespass, not to confront Mr. Vale, and not to turn this into some heroic midnight crusade." Her gaze pinned Wyatt. "Especially you." Wyatt almost said something sharp. He swallowed it. "Yes, ma'am." Alma picked up her silver pen. "Bring me something that stands without your pain holding it up." The sentence cut deeper than insult, because it was fair. Wyatt left the sheriff's office angrier than he wanted to be, and more grateful than he would admit. By afternoon, anger took him to the county budget office. Maya told him it was a bad idea. Wyatt told her most useful things were: the Beaufort County Administrative Annex had fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the spiritual temperature of a dentist's waiting room. Calder Pike received Wyatt in a narrow office lined with binders labeled by fiscal year. He was a soft-bodied man in a pale blue short-sleeved shirt, metal-framed glasses, and a smile that arrived slightly before sincerity could catch up. "Mr. Sloane," Calder said, folding his hands over a brown leather document case. "I understand you've taken on quite a substantial animal care responsibility." Wyatt sat without being invited to relax. "I'm looking for contract records tied to the Combahee flood response." Calder's smile did not change. "Public records requests must go through the proper portal." "I can use a portal." "I'm sure you can." Calder tapped one finger against the document case. "But older emergency response files may be archived, redacted, incomplete, or restricted due to liability concerns." "How convenient." Calder's eyes flicked up. "How procedural." Wyatt studied him. Calder did not look like a villain. That almost made Wyatt dislike him more. He looked like a man who brought casserole to church suppers, remembered birthdays, and signed documents that could bury people for years. "I want the search zone amendments," Wyatt said. "Drone survey invoices, K9 deployment reports, anything connected to Palmetto response systems." At the company name, Calder's finger stopped tapping. Only for a second. But Wyatt noticed. I cannot discuss active vendors without a formal request," Calder said. "Cole Bennett's file is still unresolved." That is a tragic matter. He had a dog. Many responders had animals attached to their teams. Scouts' records were altered. Calder removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a cloth. "Mr. Sloane, grief often seeks administrative enemies because paperwork is easier to confront than loss." Wyatt felt heat rise behind his eyes. He placed both hands flat on his knees to keep them still. "You practice that line," he said. "Or does it come free with the office?" Calder's smile thinned. "I would caution you," he said, "against making accusations that could affect your temporary custody agreement. 14 animals create significant liability. The county has an interest in their welfare." There it was. Not a threat exactly. A leash made of policy. Wyatt stood. Calder looked relieved too early. "I'll file the request," Wyatt said, "and I'll spell every name correctly." When he walked out, his phone buzzed. Maya had sent a photo, a scanned letter on Palmetto Response Systems letterhead. "Notice of concern. Regarding temporary transfer of retired K9 assets." Wyatt read the first lines in the hallway. Palmetto alleged that he had accepted custody under questionable emotional circumstances, that Scout might still fall under disputed training ownership, and that the company reserved the right to request immediate welfare inspection. Below that, Preston Vale's signature curved like a blade dressed for dinner. Wyatt stepped outside into the parking lot, where the sky had gone low and gray. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down at once. 14 dogs depending on him, Ruth's face in the lamplight, Scout's old tag, Cole's handwriting warning him not to trust the map, and a county system already beginning to close ranks. Then his phone buzzed again. "Maya. You need to come back." Scout heard something on the radio. By the time Wyatt reached home, the barn doors were open and the wind had shifted from the south. Inside, an old emergency weather radio sat on the workbench, crackling through static. Maya stood beside it with her arms folded tight. The dogs had gathered uneasily near the barn entrance. Mabel pressed close to her. Tank faced the yard. June, for once, had stolen nothing. Scout stood at the far wall. On that wall hung the faded Combahee map Wyatt had pinned there before leaving. The radio gave a short alert tone. Not loud, not long. A few dogs flinched. Scout did not. He walked straight to the map. His nails clicked on the barn floor. He lifted one front paw and placed it gently against the lower bend of the Combahee River. Not scratching wildly. Not performing. Simply marking. Then he looked back at Wyatt. The old dog's eyes held no magic. Only memory. Maya whispered, "He's done it twice." Tukavas, Wyatt stepped closer, careful not to crowd Scout. The paw rested below the blacked-out coordinates, near a section of riverbank marked by an old oak symbol. Cole's note returned to him. New oak marker does not match prior grid. Wyatt touched the edge of the map, then lowered his hand. "I know," he said softly, though he did not know whether he was speaking to Scout, Cole, or himself. "You remember?" Scout lowered his paw. Then, from the laptop on the workbench, a sound played. Maya had been restoring files from an old rescue unit drive while Wyatt was out. One video had finally opened. The image was grainy, filmed years earlier beneath a training canopy. Rain ticked on plastic overhead. Cole Bennett knelt beside a younger scout, one hand adjusting the dog's collar. Cole's hair was wet, his yellow rescue jacket half-zipped, his grin tilted like trouble had just told a joke. "Hold still, sir," Cole said in the video. "I outrank you in paperwork, if nothing else." Scout, younger and darker-faced, sneezed directly into Cole's sleeve. Cole laughed. The sound struck Wyatt in the chest. Not like a bullet. Like a door opening in a house he had abandoned. On the screen, Cole tapped the collar twice with 2 fingers. "If I get lost," he said, looking down at Scout, "you find your way back. Hear me? Don't let them tell you the job's over just because people get tired." Maya covered her mouth. Wyatt could not move. The real Scout had gone completely still. His ears stood high, his whole body locked onto the voice coming from the laptop. For 5 long seconds, he seemed not old at all, but suspended between then and now. Then he made a sound Wyatt had never heard from him. A small, broken whine. Not loud enough for drama, too honest for comfort. Scout stepped toward the laptop, touched the edge of the workbench with his nose, and lowered his head. Wyatt felt something inside him answer. The case was no longer about a strange file, not just a dog, not just a missing man. It was a message that had traveled 5 years through bad copies, erased names, retired kennels, a mother's waiting room, and the heart of an animal who had refused to forget. Maya stopped the video before it could loop. The barn returned slowly. The smell of dogs and hay, the shop light, the map on the wall, the storm air pressing at the doors. Wyatt looked at the blacked-out coordinates. He thought of Alma Greer's words. "Bring me something that stands without your pain holding it up." He picked up Cole's field note and placed it beside the restored video still. "All right," he said. Maya looked at him. "What?" "We build it right, records, dates, contracts, maps, every piece. No charging in, no giving Preston what he wants." Scout raised his head. Wyatt met the dog's eyes. "But we are not letting them bury him twice." Outside, thunder rolled far beyond the trees, not yet close, but coming. Scout turned toward the sound, then back to the map. Wyatt watched him and understood, with a steadiness that frightened him more than rage, that some coordinates were not only numbers on paper. Some were wounds, and some wounds had waited long enough. The first weather warning came before breakfast. Not a siren this time. Just the flat voice of the county emergency broadcast, drifting from the old radio in Wyatt Sloane's barn while he measured out food for 14 retired rescue dogs. Tropical low strengthening off the South Carolina coast. Possible heavy rainfall. Tidal flooding in low-lying areas. Residents near river branches should monitor conditions. The words were ordinary enough. They belonged to storm season, to coastal counties, to people who kept batteries in kitchen drawers and plywood leaning behind sheds. But ordinary things had teeth when they knew where to bite. Wyatt stood with the scoop in one hand and the feed bag open at his boots. For a moment, the barn lights seemed to flicker, though they did not. Rainwater. Concrete. The broken chatter of a radio. Cole's voice somewhere inside it, stretched thin by static. Wyatt forced himself to pour the food. Metal bowls clanged softly along the barn wall. The sound pulled several dogs forward. Mabel came first, slow and dignified, her gray muzzle lifting as if breakfast were a sacred civic event. June slid in from nowhere, appearing beneath Wyatt's elbow with the expression of a thief who had found religion only because religion smelled like kibble. Tank remained by the door until every other dog had a place, then took his bowl with the severe patience of an old guard captain. Scout did not come. The sable German shepherd stood outside in the damp yard, facing the road beyond the gate. His ears were up. His body had gone still in that particular way Wyatt had learned not to dismiss. Scout was not listening to the storm report. He was listening past it. Maya Ellison arrived half an hour later, tires hissing through wet gravel, a cardboard tray of coffee balanced on her passenger seat, and another stack of recovered papers sealed in a plastic bag. Her denim shirt was darkened at the cuffs from rain, and her yellow waterproof notebook was already open before she reached the barn. "You look like you slept in a chair," Wyatt said. "I upgraded," Maya replied. "Floor, near the scanner." "That medical advice?" "Disaster records don't restore themselves." She handed him the plastic bag. Inside was another page from Cole Bennett's old training log, edges stained, ink faded but readable. Wyatt did not want to touch it with wet hands. He dried them on a towel first, an act so small and careful it made Maya's expression soften. The note was dated 2 days before Cole vanished. Oak marker mismatch. Updated grid shifts east. Scout keeps returning West Bend. Request second pass before water rises. Below that, written in a tighter hand, someone moved the reference point. Wyatt read the last sentence 3 times. Not because he failed to understand it, because understanding it changed the shape of the past. For 5 years, Cole's disappearance had lived in Wyatt's mind as a terrible equation of water, timing, and failure. A man was lost because the flood was too strong, the rain too heavy, the rescue too late. Nature had been cruel, and Wyatt had not been enough. But if the map had been changed, if the search had been guided away, then Cole had not simply vanished into stormwater. He had been misplaced by human hands. Maya watched him carefully. "I don't think this is just sloppy record-keeping anymore." Wyatt folded the page back into the sleeve. "No." Outside, Scout turned from the road and stared toward the barn. The old dog had refused breakfast. That bothered Wyatt more than the warning on the radio. By noon, the sky had lowered into a hard gray ceiling. Wind moved through the pines in long, uneasy breaths. Weather alerts continued every hour. The barn became a command post of sorts. Maps pinned to plywood, file folders sorted on a table, dog medications arranged by name, towels stacked near the door. Maya called Sheriff Alma Greer from the porch while Wyatt repaired a loose section of fence that Preston Vale would certainly notice if he came looking for weakness. Alma answered on the 3rd ring. Maya put the phone on speaker. "You found another note?" the sheriff asked. "Yes," Maya said. "It mentions a moved reference point. Same oak marker." There was a pause. Wyatt heard paper shifting on Alma's end. "I can authorize a welfare check on the dogs," Alma said. "I cannot authorize a field search based on damaged notes and a retired dog's behavior." Wyatt's jaw tightened. Alma continued before he could speak. "But I can be present if you inspect public access points near the old Combahee grid. Unofficially. You do not cross posted land. You do not disturb potential evidence. You do not confront Palmetto staff. You document and leave." "That sounds like not helping," Wyatt said. "That sounds like keeping your evidence alive long enough to matter," Alma replied. The sentence landed clean. Wyatt looked across the yard at Scout, who stood in drizzle as if rain were not weather but instruction. Alma's voice softened by a fraction. "Mr. Sloane, men like Preston Vale know how to make grief look reckless. Do not hand him a portrait brush." Maya glanced at Wyatt. He exhaled slowly. Understood. I am contacting a state investigator I trust, Alma added. That is not a promise, that is preparation. The line clicked dead. Wyatt looked at Maya. She always talk like a courthouse with boots? She's keeping you out of jail. I noticed. Try appreciating it louder. Before Wyatt could answer, Tank barked once from the gate, not his usual deep announcement at passing trucks. A warning. 2 vehicles rolled up the muddy drive, a clean black SUV and a beige county sedan. Preston Vale stepped from the SUV first. Gray field jacket zipped, tablet tucked under one arm, his shoes still somehow avoiding the mud as if the earth disliked touching him. Calder Pike emerged from the sedan with a folder pressed to his chest. Pale blue shirt buttoned tight at the throat. Face shiny with the mild panic of a man who preferred fluorescent offices to weather. Maya muttered, "Speak of the devil and his assistant manager arrives." Wyatt set the hammer down. Mabel barked once, then hid behind Maya's leg as if recognizing that polite men could be worse than loud ones. June trotted up, carrying a rag she had no legal claim to. Tank stood square before the gate until Wyatt gave him a quiet word. Only then did the old shepherd step aside. Scout did not move from the barn door. Preston opened the gate without asking. "Mr. Sloane," he said brightly. "Ms. Ellison, I hope we're not interrupting." "You are," Wyatt said. Preston's smile held. "Unfortunately, urgent welfare concerns require timely attention." Calder cleared his throat and opened the folder. Under the conditional transfer agreement, the county retains the right to inspect housing, food provisions, enclosure safety, veterinary plans, and overall suitability of placement. Maya stepped forward. "The scheduled inspection is not until next week." "Concerns were raised," Preston said. "By you," Maya replied. "By multiple parties interested in responsible outcomes." Wyatt looked at Calder. "You bring a vet?" Calder blinked. "A veterinarian?" "For a welfare inspection, somebody who knows dogs." Preston answered instead. "Today is preliminary. So it's not about welfare." For the first time, Preston's eyes sharpened. There was no raised voice, no shove, no direct threat. The tension stayed dressed in legal clothing, which somehow made it uglier. Preston walked the property with his tablet, taking notes. He praised the raised bedding in the shed, then questioned whether the airflow was adequate. He complimented the water supply, then photographed a muddy patch near the fence. He admired Mabel's calm temperament, then called her a liability due to age. He paused near June, who stared up at him with Wyatt's stolen rag hanging from her mouth like evidence in a trial. "Is this one destructive?" Preston asked. "She has taste," Maya said. Calder wrote something down. Wyatt folded his arms. The inspection moved towards the barn. Scout stepped into the doorway. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood there, body still, amber eyes fixed on Preston. Preston stopped. It was brief. So brief a careless man would miss it. Wyatt was not careless. Preston's gaze dropped to Scout's collar, to the cracked brown leather, to the small, scratched tag half hidden beneath it. The color left his face, not dramatically, not enough for Calder to notice. Just a small retreat of blood beneath skin. Then Preston looked away too quickly. That was the moment Wyatt had been waiting for without knowing it. Not proof, but recognition. Scout had given the room nothing but silence, and Preston had answered it. Maya saw it too. Her fingers tightened around her notebook. Preston recovered with practiced grace. That animal may still be under disputed operational classification. "His name is Scout," Wyatt said. "I am aware. The words slipped out before Preston could polish them. Rain ticked against the barn roof. Calder looked up from his folder. Maya's eyes narrowed. Preston gave a small laugh. I am aware of the file designation. No, Wyatt said quietly. You meant scout. For a second, the whole yard seemed to hold still. Even June stopped chewing the rag. Preston closed his tablet. I suggest you keep emotions from interfering with compliance, he said. The county will be in touch. He turned and walked back toward the SUV. Calder lingered only long enough to offer a weak, procedural smile, then followed. The vehicles left mud tracks down the drive. Wyatt watched until they disappeared beyond the pines. Maya spoke first. He knew him. Scout? Or Cole? Wyatt looked at the old dog in the barn doorway. Scout had not relaxed. If anything, he seemed more certain now, like a sentry who had watched a familiar enemy pass. The storm thickened through the afternoon. By evening, rain came in steady sheets. The dog settled uneasily inside the barn and house. Wyatt moved bedding away from the west wall, checked the gutters, filled extra water buckets, and latched the feed bins twice because June stood nearby, pretending not to study his method. Maya stayed past dark, scanning the last of the files at the workbench while weather reports crackled from the radio. Sheriff Alma says the state investigator may call tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow may be underwater. Not funny. No. The radio hissed, then gave another advisory tone. Flood watch expanded. Low-lying river branches. Residents urged to avoid unnecessary travel. Scout rose. Wyatt turned. The dog crossed the barn, but not toward the wall map this time. He moved to the far corner, where old equipment from the county warehouse had been stacked after the transfer. Torn harnesses, retired leashes, cracked bowls, a folded tarp, and one canvas training bag Maya had not yet inventoried. Scout gripped the edge of the bag with his teeth and pulled. Scout, Maya said softly. The dog dragged the bag into the middle of the barn floor, then released it and placed one paw on top. Wyatt crouched beside it. The canvas was stiff with age and faintly marked with an old rescue unit stencil. He opened the flap. Inside lay a decayed long-line leash, a faded orange training flag, and a folded waterproof map wrapped in a strip of cloth. Something about the cloth made Wyatt pause. It had been tied with 2 square knots, tight and neat. Cole tied knots like that. Maya knelt beside him, suddenly silent. Wyatt unfolded the map. It was not the same as the county copy. This one had handwritten marks along the west bend of the Combahee, near a cluster of old oak symbols and a small pump station marked in blue pencil. One coordinate was circled twice. Beside it was a symbol Wyatt recognized from the field note. 2 short vertical lines and a slash. Cole's shorthand. Scout lowered his nose to the circled mark, then placed his paw gently over it. The rain hammered harder on the roof. Wyatt felt the hair rise along his arms. This was not the dog performing a trick. It was not mystical. It was simpler and heavier. Scout had carried a route inside him, the way a body carries a scar. The map, the tone, the storm, the scent of old canvas, together they had opened a door. Maya whispered, "That coordinate is west of the official search zone." Wyatt did not answer. He was staring at the map, but what he saw was not paper. He saw Cole in a yellow rescue jacket, kneeling beside Scout, tapping the collar twice. He heard the sentence from the video. "Don't let them tell you the job's over just because people get tired." The barn lights buzzed overhead. Outside, the world blurred under rain. Maya touched his arm. Wyatt, we need Alma. We'll call her. Now. We'll call her, he repeated. And then I'm going. Her face hardened. Not alone. I didn't say alone. Scout lifted his head. Wyatt looked at the dog. The old shepherd's amber eyes were steady, but there was something else in them tonight. Not pleading, not command, expectation, as if Scout had been waiting 5 years for a man to stop mistaking delay for patience. Wyatt went to the hook by the barn door and took down his rain jacket. Dark blue patched at one shoulder. He checked the flashlight, then the batteries. He took the decayed long line from the bag but set it aside. It was too old to trust. From a shelf, he pulled a newer tracking lead, coiled and strong. Maya called Alma while grabbing her own rain shell. The sheriff answered. Maya explained quickly. There was a long pause on the line. Then Alma's voice came through, sharper than before. Public access only. No posted land, no digging, no hero nonsense. Send me your location every 10 minutes. Wyatt took the phone. Sheriff. I am not finished, Alma said. If water rises, you turn back. If palmetto appears, you leave. If Scout marks something, you photograph and mark the location only. Do you understand? Wyatt looked at the map in Maya's hand, then at Scout. Yes. Say the full sentence, Mr. Sloane. He almost smiled despite the storm. I understand. Good. I'm on my way to a nearby road access point. Do not make me regret treating you like an adult. The line ended. Maya raised an eyebrow. She likes you. She hides it well. Wyatt stepped toward Scout with the tracking lead. The dog did not retreat. For the first time, Scout allowed Wyatt to clip the lead to his collar without Maya between them. Wyatt's fingers brushed the old tag. Cole Bennett, cold metal, warm fur, 5 years. He did not pray. He had never been good at asking heaven for favors, but as his thumb touched the tag, something inside him bowed its head. The dog stirred around them. Mabel watched from her bed. Tank stood and gave one low rumble, not warning, but acknowledgement. June trotted up and dropped Wyatt's missing glove at his feet. Wyatt looked down. Maya, despite everything, let out a breath that nearly became laughter. Payment for the mission? She said. Wyatt picked up the glove and tucked it into his pocket. Maybe she's our quartermaster. Rain swept sideways across the yard as they opened the barn door. The night beyond was dark, wet, and restless. The road toward the Combahee branch waited under shifting sheets of water. Somewhere out there, a coordinate marked by Cole's hand, lay beneath storm season and 5 years of silence. Wyatt tightened his grip on the lead. He was not going because he wanted to prove a theory. Not because rage needed somewhere to go. Not because he believed pain entitled him to break rules. He was going because a man had been called missing for too long. Because a mother still lived with a doorway in her heart. Because an old dog had kept watch over a name when every file had failed it. Scout stepped into the rain first. Wyatt followed. And behind them, Maya pulled the barn door shut against the storm. Rain did not fall on the Combahee lowlands. It gathered. It hung in the moss, collected in the ditches, slid down the black trunks of live oaks, and waited in every hollow place like an old secret with patience. By the time Wyatt Sloane turned his truck off the county road and onto the narrow gravel lane leading toward the river branch, the world had become water in different disguises. Scout stood in the back seat, front paws braced against the floorboard, nose lifted to the cracked window. The tracking lead lay coiled beside Wyatt's hand. Maya sat in the passenger seat with Cole's waterproof map open across her knees, trying to keep the page dry beneath the glow of her phone. Behind them, Sheriff Alma Greer followed in her cruiser, headlights softened by rain. No one spoke for the first mile. Words would have felt too bright. The windshield wipers dragged back and forth with a tired rhythm. On either side of the lane, cypress knees poked from the wet ground like knuckles of buried hands. Spanish moss swung low from the branches, gray and patient, brushing the roof of the truck as if the trees were trying to read what was inside. Wyatt kept both hands on the wheel. His grip was steady. That was not the same as being calm. Every few minutes, Maya checked their position against the map. The official county grid showed the old search zone farther east. Cole's markings pulled them west, toward a bend in the river where the land dipped and folded around itself. Public access road ends another half-mile ahead, Maya said. Wyatt nodded. From the back seat, Scout gave one soft huff. Not impatience. Recognition. Alma's voice crackled through the handheld radio Maya had clipped to her jacket. Remember the rules. We park at the access point. We document. We do not cross posted property. Maya lifted the radio. Understood. A pause. Then Alma added, "That was for him." Wyatt glanced at the radio. Maya's mouth twitched. "He understands." "I understand," Wyatt said. From the back seat, Scout sneezed against the window. Maya looked over her shoulder. "Even the dog has doubts." The small humor passed through the truck like a match struck inside a cave. It did not banish the darkness, but it gave them enough light to continue. They reached the public access point just as the rain thickened. The place was barely the parking area. A half circle of gravel, 2 rusted trash cans, a leaning sign about fishing licenses, and a narrow footpath disappearing between palmetto and oak. Beyond the trees, the river made no grand announcement. It moved unseen, heavy and brown. Its presence felt more than heard. Alma parked behind them and stepped out wearing a dark blue sheriff's rain jacket and a tan wide-brimmed hat. Rain struck the brim and slid off in steady strings. She carried a body camera on her chest, a phone sealed in a waterproof case, and a calm that seemed less emotional than engineered. She looked at Scout. Scout looked back. "Does he understand property law?" Alma asked. "No," Wyatt said, "but he may understand maps better than the county did." "Then let us all try to meet somewhere in the middle." Wyatt clipped the lead to Scout's collar. His fingers brushed the old tag beneath the leather. Cole Bennett. Scout did not pull. That worried Wyatt more than pulling would have. The dog moved forward slowly, nose low, reading the saturated earth as if each layer of mud still held a sentence from 5 years ago. They followed single file. Scout first, Wyatt behind him, Maya with the map, Alma last, recording their path. The woods closed around them. There was no clean trail, only a suggestion of where feet had once passed. Water-filled old tire ruts. Ferns slapped against their legs, roots twisted under the mud. The air smelled of wet bark, decaying leaves, river silt, and something metallic from the old structures hidden deeper in the trees. Scout paused at the first marker. It was only a broken branch lodged in the fork of an oak, half rotted and slick with rain. Wyatt might have walked past it. Maya might have photographed it and moved on. But Scout stopped, sniffed the bark, then looked toward the west. Maya checked the map. "Cole marked a split trail here," she said. "Official map has no split." Alma took a picture. "Documenting." They continued. Scout stopped again beside a sunken concrete post covered in moss. Then, at a patch of higher ground, where storm debris had gathered in a crescent shape. Then, at an old survey ribbon so faded it looked almost white. Each stop seemed small, too small for a movie, too small for the kind of revelation people expected when the dead tried to speak. But Wyatt knew better. Truth did not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it came in fractions: a ribbon, a post, a line on a map that leaned the wrong way. Enough fractions could build a staircase out of a grave. "Wyatt," Maya said, her voice tight. She stood beside a tree where two maps disagreed. On the county version, the search grid bent east from that point toward a wider, safer route. On Cole's map, the older marks showed the trail continuing west toward the river bend. Scout stood facing west. Alma came closer and studied both maps. Her face did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "That deviation is not small," she said. "No," Maya replied. "It would move teams off the bend entirely." "By how far?" Maya measured with her thumb and the map scale. "Enough that a dog working the official grid would miss whatever Scout found." Wyatt looked west through the rain. The woods there seemed darker, though perhaps that was only his mind giving shape to dread. Scout took one step forward. Wyatt did not follow immediately. Alma noticed. "You all right?" No, Wyatt thought. But there were answers that served truth and answers that only fed worry. "I'm here," he said. "That was not my question. It's the one I can answer." Alma held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Scout led them west. The path narrowed until branches clawed at their sleeves. Water ran downhill around their boots. The river grew louder ahead, not roaring, but speaking in a deep, continuous voice. Maya slipped once on a root. Wyatt caught her elbow before she fell. She gave him a quick nod and kept moving. Then they saw the sign. It had been posted on two fresh metal stakes between old trees. Palmetto Response Systems Private Survey Area, no unauthorized entry. The logo looked clean and official, its stylized palmetto tree printed in black against weatherproof plastic. In that wet, ancient place, the sign seemed obscenely new. Scout stopped 3 feet from it. His body went rigid. Wyatt felt his own pulse climb. Alma stepped forward immediately. "Nobody crosses." "It's public land up to the bend," Maya said. "Not according to that sign." "That sign may be wrong." "Wrong signs still get people arrested before they get corrected." Wyatt stared past the sign. Through the trees, he could see a low concrete shape near the water, partly hidden by vines and mud. His hand tightened on the lead. Scout did not pull. He only stood there, waiting. That patience cut Wyatt worse than urgency would have. 5 years, the dog seemed to say without sound. "I can wait another minute." "Can you?" Wyatt loosened his grip. "Photograph it," he said. Alma looked at him, and for the first time that day, approval flickered across her face. Maya photographed the sign, the coordinates, the surrounding trees, the map overlays. Alma recorded a short verbal note, identifying the location and the conflict between public access markers and Palmetto's posted boundary. Then Scout moved. Not forward past the sign, but left. He slipped along the edge of the brush, following a shallow ditch that curved away from the posted area. Wyatt followed, careful, led slack. The route was ugly and narrow, but not marked private. Alma checked her county parcel map twice before allowing them to continue. "Your dog has a lawyer's sense of avoidance," she said. "He's smarter than I am," Wyatt answered. No argument filed. The ditch led them around a cluster of palmetto and down toward a low place near the water. There, half buried in vines, stood the remains of an old concrete pump station. Its roof was gone. One wall leaned outward, gripped by roots. Rusted bolts protruded from the foundation. Rainwater pooled in its broken corners. Scout stepped onto the cracked slab and lowered his nose. Wyatt felt the air change. Not supernatural. Nothing so simple. It was the change that happened when a place stopped being scenery and became testimony. Maya crouched near the base of the wall. "There's metal here." She brushed mud away with a gloved hand and uncovered a small tag, rectangular, corroded at the edges. A faded stamped code remained visible. K9 SAR Field Kit B7. Maya looked up. This belonged to the old unit. Alma photographed it before anyone moved it. "Leave it in place for now." A few yards away, Alma found something else. A wooden survey stake lying half-buried, its orange top darkened by mud. She used the toe of her boot to clear around it, then stopped. "This was not knocked over," she said. Wyatt came closer. The stake had been driven into the ground upside down, the marked end buried, the plain end exposed. It was not a fallen marker. It was a marker made useless on purpose. Maya's face went pale. If that's one of the original reference points, then someone didn't just misread the map, Wyatt finished. Thunder rolled overhead. This time it came close. It cracked across the lowlands with a sound that turned the river, trees, and sky into one enormous drum. Wyatt's body reacted before his mind could speak to it. His hand locked around Scout's lead. His lungs forgot the order of breathing. Rain became floodwater. The broken pump station became concrete corridor. The smell of mud sharpened into the smell of submerged dust and diesel. Somewhere behind his ribs, a radio screamed static. "Wyatt, you copy?" He could not move. The lowland blurred. Maya said his name. Alma said something else, firmer, closer. Wyatt heard neither clearly. His eyes fixed on the cracked slab beneath his boots, but he was not there. He was 5 years back, too far from Cole, too late to answer, carrying the useless weight of being alive when another man was not. Then Scout turned. The dog stepped back against Wyatt's leg, pressing the full warmth of his body into Wyatt's shin. Not excited, not frightened, solid, a living weight, a now. Wyatt looked down. Scout's amber eyes lifted to his. The old dog did not whine. He did not command. He simply stood there, giving Wyatt something to orient around besides the storm inside his skull. Wyatt dragged in a breath, then another. His fingers loosened on the lead. Maya's face came back into focus. Alma's rain-dark hat. The leaning pump station. The sound of actual rain, not memory. Wyatt swallowed. "I'm here," he said. Scout stayed against him. This time, the words were true. Alma watched him with the stern mercy of someone who had seen people break and did not confuse it with weakness. "We move slower," she said. Wyatt nodded. Maya's voice was soft. Scout knew. Wyatt looked down at the dog still braced against him. "No," he said. Scout stayed. The distinction mattered. The water began rising not long after. It gathered first around the low roots, then spread over the path by the pump station. Alma checked the time and the weather feed on her phone. Her jaw set. "We have to go." Scout resisted for the first time, not violently, but with a backward lean toward the foundation. Wyatt crouched beside him. "I know," he said. "We're not done." Scout's ears flicked. "We're not leaving it. We're leaving alive." That seemed to satisfy neither of them. but the dog allowed himself to be led. As they turned back, Maya noticed a tangle of roots beneath the far edge of the slab. Something dark and rectangular had wedged there, caught in debris where water had carved out the soil. "Wait," she said. Alma's voice sharpened. "Ms. Ellison, it's on this side. I'm not digging." Maya lay on her stomach at the edge of the slab, reached carefully beneath the root mass, and pulled out a mud-coated waterproof data case no bigger than a paperback book. The seal was cracked, but intact. A faded rescue unit sticker clung to one side. Wyatt stared at it. Alma immediately took an evidence bag from her jacket. "Do not open it here." Maya placed the case inside. The river muttered behind them. A sound carried through the rain then, not thunder, engines. Wyatt turned toward the higher road beyond the trees. Headlights moved behind the curtain of rain, slow and pale, too far to identify, close enough to feel watched. Alma saw them too. "We leave now," she said. There was no chase, no shouted threats, no men running through trees, only the sudden cold knowledge that someone else had come to a place that was not supposed to matter anymore. They retraced their path through the woods, quicker now. Scout moved without hesitation, guiding them around roots and flooded dips. The Palmetto sign flashed once in Maya's phone light, bright and clean in the storm. Alma photographed the headlights through the trees as best she could, though rain swallowed most of the image. By the time they reached the vehicles, water had begun creeping across the gravel access point. Alma took the sealed data case and locked it in a metal evidence box in her cruiser. "I'll log it as recovered from a public access adjacent site near a disputed boundary," she said. Maya frowned. "That sounds complicated." "It is honest complicated," Alma said. "That is better than simple wrong." Wyatt loaded Zid Scout into the truck. The dog was soaked, mud-dark, and trembling slightly from cold or memory. Wyatt wrapped a towel around him. Scout allowed it, then lowered his head onto the seat. Wyatt stood in the rain for 1 second longer, looking back toward the road where the headlights had been. He did not need to see Preston Vale's face to know the storm had drawn more than one person to the river. Back at Wyatt's barn, the world seemed too bright under the shop lights. The dogs greeted them with anxious movement and wet noses. Mabel pressed herself against Scout until he tolerated it. Tank inspected Wyatt's boots. June stole the wet towel, realized it was unpleasant, and abandoned it with moral outrage. Alma brought the evidence box inside. Maya cleaned the data case under controlled light without breaking the seal, documenting each step while Alma recorded. The case contained a damaged memory card, 2 folded pages sealed in plastic, and a dead GPS locator. Maya worked with a card reader from her scanner kit, while Alma made calls from the porch. Wyatt stood behind them, one hand resting lightly on Scout's back. For a long time, there was only the sound of rain on the roof and Maya's keyboard. Then audio crackled from the laptop speakers. Static first. Wind. Water. A man breathing hard but controlled. Cole's voice. "Bennett to field command. Scout has marked a secondary indication west of updated grid. Repeat, west of updated grid. Current map does not match physical marker. Request permission for second pass before withdrawal." A burst of static swallowed the next words. Wyatt's hand tightened in Scout's fur. Another voice came through, distant and clipped, too distorted to identify. "Negative. Conditions worsening. Pull back. Official grid cleared." Cole again, sharper now. Official grid is wrong. Scout's got something here. I need 10 minutes. Static. Rain. Then Cole, lower, as if speaking away from the radio. "Easy, Scout. I know, boy. I know." The recording broke, returned, and carried one final sound. Cole's voice calling through storm. "Scout!" The audio ended. No one moved. Scout lay beneath the workbench with his eyes open, body still as carved wood. The old dog did not cry out this time. He did not stand. He simply stared into the space beneath the table, as if the sound had not come from the laptop at all, but from the same dark place where he had kept it for 5 years. Wyatt lowered himself to the floor beside him. Slowly, Scout leaned his shoulder against Wyatt's knee. Maya wiped at her face with the back of her wrist and pretended she was only clearing rainwater. Alma closed her notebook. "This," the sheriff said quietly, "stands better than pain." Wyatt looked at the blank laptop screen. Cole had asked for 10 minutes. 5 years later, the echo of that request had finally reached them. Wyatt rested his hand near Scout's collar, not touching the tag this time, only near it. "We heard you," he said. Scout's eyes remained open. Outside, the storm kept moving over Beaufort County, washing the roads, bending the trees, filling old ditches and hidden places. But inside the barn, amid 14 retired rescue dogs and a handful of people no longer able to pretend this was only history, the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. By morning, Preston Vale had learned how to smile on television. He stood beneath the awning of the Beaufort County Administrative Annex, with rain still falling behind him. Gray field jacket zipped to the throat, Palmetto Response Systems logo clean over his heart. A local reporter held a microphone toward him, while 2 county officials hovered in the background like men waiting to see which way the weather would turn. "Our concern," Preston said, in a voice smooth enough to make poison sound like medicine, "is and has always been the welfare of retired rescue animals and the integrity of emergency response operations. Mr. Sloane's emotional attachment to these dogs is understandable, but emotion cannot replace responsible oversight." In Wyatt Sloane's barn, the television sat on mute after the first minute. Wyatt did not need to hear the rest. The captions were enough. "Formal petition filed to review. Transfer of retired K9 unit, question raised over former SEAL's care of 14 dogs." Maya Ellison stood beside the workbench with her arms folded tight across her damp denim shirt. Sheriff Alma Greer had arrived before dawn, bringing sealed copies of the recovered audio, photographs of the altered survey stake, and a face that had slept less than anyone else in the room but showed it the least. Scout lay beneath the table, close to Wyatt's boots. He had eaten half his breakfast, which Maya declared a political improvement. Tank stood near the barn door, watching the yard as if he expected Preston's SUV to roll in at any moment. Mabel slept beside Ruth Bennett's old yellow rescue jacket, which had arrived folded carefully in a brown paper bag just after sunrise. That was when Ruth came. She had not called first. Wyatt saw her through the rain, a small figure in a cream cardigan beneath a gray-blue raincoat, stepping carefully through the mud with the paper bag held against her chest. She looked frail until she reached the barn doorway. Then the set of her mouth made it clear that fragile things could still cut glass. "I brought Cole's jacket," she said. Wyatt opened the door wider. No one told her she should not be there. Not Maya, not Alma, not Wyatt. Some thresholds belonged to mothers. Ruth stood for a moment inside the barn, looking at the maps, the evidence bags, the laptop, the dogs, the people who had gathered around her son's unfinished sentence. The room smelled of wet fur, coffee, printer ink, and storm air. It was not a courtroom. It was not a church. Somehow, it had become both. Scout rose when he saw her. slowly. The old German shepherd crossed the barn with his head lowered, not like a dog begging, not like a dog submitting, but like a soldier approaching a flag he remembered. Ruth knelt before anyone could stop her. Scout stopped one step away. For a few seconds, neither moved. Then Ruth opened the paper bag and unfolded Cole's faded yellow rescue jacket. The name patch was worn, but still readable. Bennett Scout's ears shifted forward. He leaned in and pressed his nose to the sleeve. A sound passed through him, too soft to be a whine, too heavy to be breath. Ruth closed her eyes. "Oh, Scout," she whispered. "You poor, faithful old man." Wyatt looked away. Not because the moment was too sad, because it was too holy. When Ruth stood again, she did not ask for comfort. She held the jacket against her body and looked at Alma. "Sheriff, I don't need anybody to promise me a happy ending." Alma's expression softened without losing its discipline. "Mrs. Bennett." "I don't," Ruth said gently. "I've had 5 years of people giving me words with no floor under them. Maybe, someday. Pending. Inconclusive." Her voice trembled, then steadied. "I need the truth. Even if it hurts properly this time." The barn was silent except for rain on tin. Wyatt felt something in that sentence settle into him. Hurts properly. There were wounds that did not heal because they were never allowed to bleed in the right place. Cole had been missing, unresolved, unconfirmed, suspended in a government word that made grief stand forever in a doorway with its coat still on. Alma looked at Wyatt, then Maya. "The state investigator is on the way," she said. "His team will take control of the site if the GPS data matches what we think it does." Maya lifted a printed sheet. "It matches. The locator file is damaged, but there are enough timestamp fragments. Cole and Scout were west of the official grid before the withdrawal order." Wyatt stared at the coordinate. The same West Bend, the same pump station, the same place Scout had led them in the rain. Alma picked up her phone. "Then we do this right." Doing it right took longer than Rage would have liked. Calls, forms, jurisdiction, weather checks, a digital chain of custody for the memory card, a preliminary cross-reference between the GPS fragments and Palmetto's invoice dates, a request for technical support, a formal notation that the suspected evidence site lay near a disputed survey boundary but was accessible through a public corridor. Wyatt hated every minute. He also understood every minute. Preston wanted a reckless veteran, a trespasser, a grieving man dragged by a dog into private property, a story simple enough to discredit. Alma refused to give him one. By early afternoon, the rain had lightened to a thin gray mist. The state team arrived in 2 vehicles without sirens. An evidence technician, a search specialist, and a quiet man in a dark rain jacket named Daniel Rourke, who introduced himself as an investigator with the State Emergency Management Oversight Division. He had close-cropped black hair, tired eyes, and the manner of someone who had spent years listening to officials explain why missing paperwork was never anyone's fault. He shook Wyatt's hand once. "I'm not here to validate anyone's feelings," Rourke said. "Good," Wyatt replied. Rourke glanced toward Scout. "But I've learned not to ignore working dogs with better memories than departments." Wyatt decided he liked him enough. They returned to the Combahee lowlands in a small convoy. This time, there was no creeping sense of trespass. There were cameras, markers, evidence flags, GPS units, body cameras, and people whose job was to make silence admissible. The storm had left the woods wet and shining. Water still moved through low places, but the level had dropped enough for controlled access. Spanish moss hung heavy from the oaks. The pump station waited near the river bend, broken and root-bound, looking less like a ruin now and more like an old witness called back to court. Scout walked at the front with Wyatt holding the lead. The dog did not rush. He moved with the grave certainty of one returning to a post he had never abandoned. Behind them came Maya with the maps sealed in plastic. Alma followed beside Rourke, speaking quietly into her recorder. Ruth remained at the access road under the care of a deputy, Cole's jacket folded across her arms. She had asked to come farther. Alma had gently said no. Ruth had accepted it. Truth did not require her to stand in every painful place. At the pump station, Scout stopped. He did not go to the broken wall where Maya had found the field kit tag. He did not go to the roots where the data case had been trapped. Instead, he angled toward a shallow depression beyond the slab, near an old water channel partly filled with silt and leaves. The search specialist, a broad-shouldered woman with silver hair tucked beneath a cap, raised one hand. "Hold!" Everyone stopped. Scout lowered his nose, moved 3 steps, then sat. A trained indication. Quiet. Final. Wyatt felt the world narrow. Rourke signaled to the team. "Mark the point. Establish perimeter." Evidence flags went into the mud. Cameras documented the area. The specialist brought in a ground probe and spoke in low tones to Alma. No one moved quickly. No one made dramatic speeches. Even the river seemed to lower its voice. Wyatt stood with Scout at the edge of the marked area. He did not look away, but he did not need to see everything. Some truths deserved curtains. The team worked with care, shielding the site with tarps, photographing, measuring, documenting. Time became strange there. Minutes stretched thin, rain ticked from branches. Maya stood with one hand pressed over her mouth, eyes fixed not on the work, but on Wyatt. Alma's face remained steady, though once her hand tightened around her silver pen hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Then Rourke approached Wyatt. In his gloved hand, sealed in a clear evidence bag, lay a small metal identification tag darkened by age. A second bag held a broken watch face. A third held the casing of an old radio locator. Rourke's voice was low. "We have personal effects consistent with Cole Bennett. Formal identification will take time, but the tag gives us probable confirmation." Wyatt did not speak. The name in the bag was not a body, not a graphic ending, not an image to be looked at. It was enough. Too much. Cole had become small enough to fit in evidence bags, yet large enough to shake the whole county. Scout lowered himself to the ground beside Cole's jacket, which Maya had carried forward after Alma allowed Ruth closer to the perimeter. The dog placed his head on the folded yellow fabric. Ruth stood several feet away, one hand at her throat. No cry came from her, only a breath leaving a place too deep to measure. Wyatt stepped toward her, then stopped. This was not his grief to organize. Ruth walked to Scout instead. She knelt slowly beside him and touched the sleeve of Cole's jacket. Scout did not move. "You stayed," she whispered. The old dog closed his eyes. Wyatt turned away then, looking into the trees so the moment could belong to them. Behind the solemn work at the site, another truth began to assemble. Rourke's technician had overlaid the recovered GPS fragments with the official Combahee search records. The mismatch was no longer a suspicion. Cole and Scout had been west of the updated grid when the withdrawal order came. The original markers, including the oak reference point, lined up with Cole's handwritten map. The official reports filed later moved that active search corridor east. Maya stood over the technician's tablet, rain dripping from her hair onto her jacket. That shift would clear the pump station from the report. It did, the technician said. Alma looked at Rourke. And Palmetto? Rourke opened another file on his tablet. 3 supplemental survey invoices after the unresolved missing person classification remained active. Drone mapping, hydrology review, site access consulting. Each one references incomplete closure of the Combahee recovery zone. Wyatt stares at the screen. Money had followed the absence. Every missing signature, every unresolved status, every need for additional survey had carried a price. Calder Pike's name appeared on the authorization line. Preston Vale's company appeared on the invoice. There it was. Not in blood, not in shouting, but in dates, coordinates, and payments. A clean crime. A white-collar grave. The phrase rose in Wyatt's mind with a coldness that made him sick. Rourke spoke carefully. This does not prove intent by itself. No, Alma said, but it proves the official story cannot stand. As if summoned by those words, an SUV rolled into view beyond the access road. Black, clean, familiar. Preston Vale stepped out before anyone invited him. Gray jacket, immaculate, tablet in hand, expression arranged into outrage. This is an active contracted survey zone, he called. You are compromising a recovery site. Alma turned slowly. There were many kinds of silence. The one that fell then had a badge in it. Mr. Vale, she said, step no closer. Preston stopped, but his eyes moved past her to the flags, the tarps, the evidence bags, Scout lying beside Cole's jacket. For the first time since Wyatt had met him, Preston did not look like a man controlling the room. He looked like a man counting exits. Rourke approached. Daniel Rourke, State Emergency Management Oversight. This site is now under official review. Preston smiled thinly. Then you know old disaster records are notoriously messy. Storm response creates confusion, coordinates get mislogged, contractors inherit errors they did not create. Maybe, Alma said. She lifted one hand, and Maya brought the tablet with the audio file already queued. Cole's voice, weathered by static, played into the wet air. Official grid is wrong. Scout's got something here. I need 10 minutes. The words passed over the pump station, the river, the tarps, the old dog, the mother, the man who had carried guilt too long. Preston's face did not collapse. Men like him did not collapse easily. But the polished surface cracked, only enough to show what lived underneath. Alma watched him. We will need your full contract records, Mr. Vale. All Combahee-related amendments, all survey invoices, all communications with county budget staff. Preston's voice cooled. You'll need proper authorization. Rourke held up his phone. Already in process. Calder Pike did not come to the site. But by late afternoon, Alma received confirmation that his office computer and contract files had been secured pending review. The county administrator, suddenly concerned with transparency, issued a statement that no one read aloud because no one needed another clean sentence trying to wash dirty hands. At the edge of the access road, Ruth asked to see Scout one more time before they left. Wyatt unclipped the lead but stayed close. Scout walked to her with his head lowered, Cole's old tag faintly visible beneath the collar. Ruth knelt with effort. Her hands trembled when she reached for the tag. Scout allowed her to lift it. The metal rested in her palm, scratched, worn, stubborn as love. For a moment, Ruth held the name of her son and the loyalty of the dog who had carried it. Her face changed, not healed, not happy, but released from one kind of prison. Wyatt expected her to keep it. She did not. She pressed the tag to her lips once, then fastened it back beneath Scout's collar. "Cole trusted you to carry it," she said, "so you carry it a little longer." Scout leaned forward and touched his nose to her wrist. Ruth smiled then, through tears she did not bother hiding. Wyatt stood a few paces away, rain sliding down his face. His eyes burned, but he did not break. There had been a time when he thought not breaking meant feeling nothing. Now he understood that standing still while feeling everything required a different kind of strength. Maya came beside him. "He brought him home," she said. Wyatt looked at Scout, at Ruth, at the evidence flags near the pump station, at Alma speaking into her recorder with calm fury, at Preston Vale standing by his SUV under the weight of a story no tablet could rearrange. "No," Wyatt said softly. Scout kept the door open. The river moved beyond them, brown and patient. For 5 years it had carried silence. Now, at last, the silence had a name. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, not with sirens or flashing lights, but with a headline on the local news and a photograph of an old German shepherd standing beside a faded yellow rescue jacket. By noon, Beaufort County had learned the name Cole Bennett again. Not as a missing file, not as an unresolved line in a report, as a man. The first statement from the county was careful, polished, and ashamed in the way public statements often were when truth arrived before courage. Officials announced that all Combahee flood response records would be reopened for independent review. Palmetto Response Systems had its active contracts frozen pending investigation. Calder Pike was placed on administrative leave. Several invoice batches tied to extended survey operations were turned over to state auditors. No one used the word justice yet. Justice was too large a word to fit inside one press release. But the old story had cracked, and light had entered. At Wyatt Sloane's property, the change came in stranger, smaller forms. A woman from town arrived with 3 bags of senior dog food and refused to take payment. A retired carpenter who had laughed at the auction stood at the gate for almost 10 minutes before clearing his throat and asking if the barn roof still leaked. A church group brought blankets, though June immediately selected the best one and dragged it behind the feed bins like a tiny pirate queen claiming new territory. Wyatt stood in the yard, watching it happen with the troubled expression of a man being thanked for something he had not done alone. "You look uncomfortable," Maya Ellison said. She stood beside him with her yellow waterproof notebook tucked under one arm, now swollen with lists, signatures, vet appointments, supply donors, and names of volunteers. In 3 days, Maya had somehow become the unofficial commander of a small civilian army made of retirees, students, dog lovers, and people with pickup trucks. "I liked it better when everyone thought I was strange," Wyatt said. "They still do." "That helps." Maya smiled. "Now they think you're useful and strange." Big promotion. Across the yard, Mabel lay on a quilt beneath the porch steps, accepting visitors with the serene authority of a queen mother. Tank stationed himself by the newly repaired gate, inspecting every person who entered as if deciding whether they had proper security clearance. June had taken a volunteer's wool hat and was being negotiated with by 3 adults who lacked her strategic patience. Scout sat near the barn door, not hidden now, not quite welcoming either. He watched the people come and go, his amber eyes steady beneath his graying brow. The old tag beneath his collar still rested against his chest. Cole Bennett's name caught the light when Scout turned his head, a small, dull flash, like a star seen through rain. Wyatt crossed the yard and checked the water bowls, mostly because his hands needed work. People kept trying to speak to him in full sentences that contained gratitude, apology, or admiration. He had very little practice receiving any of those without wanting to step behind a wall. An older man in suspenders approached with a box of hinges. "Mr. Sloane?" Wyatt straightened. "Wyatt." The man looked at his boots. "I was at the auction." Wyatt said nothing. "I laughed when you said you'd take all 14. The man cleared his throat. "That was low of me." Wyatt looked past him toward the dogs. June had surrendered the wool hat only after receiving a biscuit and what appeared to be a formal apology. "You didn't know them," Wyatt said. "No." The man looked at Scout. "But I should have known enough." He set the hinges on the workbench and walked away before Wyatt had to answer. That was how the apologies came. Not grand, not clean. People brought boards, nails, food, towels, money folded in envelopes. They came with bent heads and awkward hands. Some said they were sorry. Some did not, but stayed an hour fixing a fence post until the words became unnecessary. The barn changed, not into a facility. Wyatt hated that word. A facility was where living things became inventory. It became a refuge. Maya helped him draw up records for each dog, not asset codes, not auction numbers, but names, histories, medications, fears, preferences. Mabel liked thick blankets and disliked slick floors. Tank needed joint supplements and a job by the gate. June required puzzle toys, reinforced latches, and possibly a parole officer. Scout needed patience, quiet, and a place near doors. Sheriff Alma Greer handled the legal side with the grim satisfaction of a woman finally using paperwork as a shovel in the right direction. She arranged protective custody language for the dogs while the county reviewed the failed transfer process. The 14 retired rescue dogs would not be reclaimed by Palmetto. They would either remain in Wyatt's care under a supervised retirement program or be placed in carefully screened homes where their service records followed them like medals finally pinned where people could see. "This is temporary," Alma told Wyatt one afternoon, standing in the barn with her silver pen tapping a folder. Wyatt looked around at the beds, bowls, volunteers, supply shelves, and June trying to open a cabinet with the focus of a criminal engineer. "Define temporary." Alma did not look up. "Until it becomes legally permanent." "That your professional opinion?" "That is my polite warning that I am very good at forms." Wyatt nodded toward the dogs. "They'll need a name for the place." Maya looked up from the vaccine chart. "Not a cute one." "Definitely not cute," Alma said. From beneath the table, June sneezed. Wyatt glanced at Scout, who lay near the open barn door, watching rainwater drip from the eaves. "Bennett House," Wyatt said. The room went quiet. Maya's pen stopped moving. Alma's face softened. Wyatt looked away, suddenly embarrassed by his own voice. "Unless Ruth hates it." "She won't," Maya said. And she did not. Ruth Bennett heard the name 2 days later while standing beside the river, sunlight breaking through clouds in pale gold ribbons. The memorial for Cole was small, because Ruth had asked for small. A few county responders came. Alma stood in uniform. Maya held a folded program she had made herself. Daniel Rourke stayed near the back, quiet and watchful. Several members of the community gathered at a respectful distance. Wyatt stood with Scout at his side. No one spoke of remains. No one painted pain with unnecessary colors. There was a photograph of Cole smiling in his faded yellow rescue jacket, one hand resting on a younger scout's collar. There was a table with wildflowers in mason jars. There was the sound of the Combahee moving beyond the trees, brown and slow and ancient, no longer the only keeper of the story. Ruth wore her cream cardigan beneath a soft blue shawl. Her hair moved lightly in the river wind. She looked smaller than the grief she carried, and stronger than anyone had a right to ask. When she stepped forward to speak, even the birds seemed to lower their voices. "My son was missing for 5 years," Ruth said. "But I have learned that missing is not the same as gone. Sometimes a person remains in the work they loved. Sometimes in the people they trusted. Sometimes." She looked down at Scout, and her voice trembled into a smile. "Sometimes in a stubborn old dog who refuses to retire from loyalty." A few people laughed softly through tears. Scout sat still. Wyatt felt the lead slack in his hand. Ruth continued. "Cole deserved the truth. So did the others whose files waited too long in boxes. I am grateful to Sheriff Greer, to Maya, to Mr. Rourke's team, and to everyone now helping bring those names back into daylight." She turned to Wyatt. "And I am grateful to the man who listened when a dog said something was not finished." Wyatt lowered his eyes. He had faced medals with less discomfort. Ruth did not let him hide entirely. "Wyatt," she said, "my son loved you. He was not a man who wasted love." The words entered him quietly. No thunder, no flashback, no wound reopening with drama, just a key turning. For 5 years, Wyatt had carried a private sentence. I left him, though evidence had changed that sentence. But evidence lived in the mind. Ruth's words entered somewhere deeper, not absolution, something humbler, permission to stop punishing himself in Cole's name. After the brief service, Ruth asked for a moment with Scout. Wyatt unclipped the lead. Scout walked to her, slow and dignified. Ruth knelt, took the old tag gently between her fingers, and touched her thumb to Cole's name. "You keep him honest," she whispered to Scout. Then she looked toward Wyatt. "Both of you." Scout leaned his head against her shoulder. Ruth closed her eyes and held him there. The wind moved through the Spanish moss, and for an instant the trees looked like old guardians bowing their gray heads over mother, dog, and memory. That evening, Bennett House received its first official sign. It was nothing fancy. A painted board made by the retired carpenter hung over the barn door while Wyatt held the ladder and Maya argued that it needed to be level. Alma stood below with her arms crossed, offering legal commentary no one requested. June supervised by stealing a paint rag and placing it in the water bucket. Bennett House Retired Disaster K9 Refuge. Wyatt stared at the sign longer than he expected. A refuge. Not for heroes, exactly. Heroes were what people called others when they wanted the story to end neatly. This was for workers, survivors, old dogs with stiff hips and sharp memories, people who woke at night hearing sounds no one else heard, mothers who had waited too long, towns learning that shame could either rot in silence or become repair. Scout came to stand beside him. Wyatt looked down. "What do you think?" Scout sniffed the air, then walked inside the barn and took the best bed before Mabel could claim it. Maya laughed. High approval. Wyatt shook his head. Thief. June is the thief. Scout is management. For the first time in longer than Wyatt could measure, laughter left him without feeling like a betrayal. Days passed. The investigation widened. More families were contacted. More records were reviewed. Palmetto's clean language began to fail under dirty numbers. Calder Pike's signatures appeared, where he had hoped no one would look twice. Preston Vale stopped appearing on camera. That did not heal anything, but it changed the direction of harm. For once, the questions moved toward the people who had made pain profitable. Wyatt kept working. He replaced the last rusted gate hinge. He learned which pill went in which dog's food, and which dog would spit it out if peanut butter was not applied with appropriate respect. He let volunteers help, which was harder for him than rebuilding the barn alone would have been. He drove Ruth to one meeting with the state investigator and said almost nothing the whole way, which Ruth declared a vast improvement over men who speak when they are nervous. At night, Scout slept near Wyatt's bedroom door, not outside in the barn, not hidden near an exit, near Wyatt. The first time a distant ambulance passed on the county road, its siren rising thin through the dark, Wyatt woke before he knew he had been asleep. His body tightened. His hand reached for the side of the bed, as if searching for a radio that was not there. Then he heard nails on the floor. Scout lifted his head from the doorway. The old dog did not rush to him, did not whine, did not make the moment larger than it was. He simply stood, crossed the room, and pressed his shoulder against the side of the bed. Wyatt sat there in the dark, breathing hard. The siren faded. The room remained the room. Wooden walls, a chair with jeans thrown over it, a half-open window carrying the smell of wet pine, Scout's warm weight against the mattress. Outside, 14 old rescue dogs slept across porch, barn, and yard, an army honorably discharged at last. Wyatt put his hand on Scout's back. "I'm here," he said. Scout leaned harder against him, as if answering, "So am I." Wyatt did not sleep immediately. Healing was not a door that swung open all at once. It was a stubborn hinge. It moved a little, complained, held, moved again. He thought of Cole by the river, younger and laughing, tapping Scout's collar twice. He thought of Ruth's words. He was not a man who wasted love. He thought of the old tag, still resting under Scout's collar, not as a burden now, but as a trust. Eventually, Scout lay down beside the bed instead of returning to the doorway. That was new. Wyatt turned off the lamp. Darkness settled, but it did not become a flood. The house creaked. A dog snored somewhere down the hall. June barked once in her sleep, probably arresting an imaginary glove. The sound made Wyatt smile into the dark. Hours later, another siren passed far away. Wyatt opened his eyes. His heart stirred, but did not bolt. Scout raised his head. Wyatt looked at him and whispered, "We're all right, boy." Scout studied him for a moment, then gave a long breath and lowered his head again. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of dogs sleeping, rain easing, wood cooling, and a truth that had finally found its way home. Wyatt closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he did not dream of water taking Cole away. He dreamed of a door left open, a yellow jacket in sunlight, and an old German shepherd walking through rain with a name no one had managed to erase. When morning came, Wyatt woke to Mabel barking for breakfast, Tank objecting to a delivery truck, and June standing proudly in the hallway with one of his socks. Scout was still beside the bed. Wyatt looked at the dog and let the first quiet of the day enter him. It was not a cure. It was not a miracle. It was one night. But sometimes one night was the first plank in a bridge back to the living. Sometimes peace does not arrive by erasing what we lost. Sometimes it comes when the truth is finally spoken, when a name is remembered, and when one faithful soul refuses to let love be buried with the past. Wyatt thought he was saving 14 forgotten rescue dogs. But through Scout, He learned that loyalty can become a lantern, even in the darkest storm. And perhaps, in our own lives, God sometimes sends hope in quiet forms. A friend who stays, a memory that guides us, or a small act of courage that opens the door to healing. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who Scout reminded you of, or what part of Wyatt's journey stayed with you. And if you believe stories of loyalty, second chances, and quiet miracles still matter, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May peace find you gently, even in the places where your heart is still learning to heal.